Bullies messed with the new black girl. Big mistake. Next day they were begging. The fluorescent lights of Ridgewood High buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Amara Williams clutched her class schedule, scanning the crowded hallway for room 204. Students rushed past her in designer sneakers and perfectly coordinated outfits, their laughter echoing off the polished floors. She adjusted the strap of her thrifted messenger bag, a beautiful vintage piece she'd found at Goodwill, and took a deep breath. "Just blend in," she whispered to herself, the same words she'd repeated in the mirror that morning while carefully braiding her natural hair into two thick plaits that fell gracefully over her shoulders. The transfer had been sudden. Her mother's job relocation meant leaving behind her friends at Washington Prep, where she'd been student council treasurer and debate team captain. Here at Ridgewood, she was nobody, just another mid-semester transfer trying to find her place in an already established social ecosystem. As she finally located her first period AP literature class, Amara noticed the way conversation seemed to pause when she walked by. Eyes followed her movements, not with curiosity but with something else, something that made her skin prickle with unease. She'd experienced this before, the weight of being the only black face in predominantly white spaces, but it never got easier. Well, what do we have here?" The voice belonged to a tall, perfectly bronzed girl with platinum blonde hair that cascaded in beach waves down her back. Rachel Morrison stood in the center of the hallway like a queen holding court, surrounded by her carefully curated group of followers. Her cheerleading uniform was pristine, not a thread out of place, and her smile was as sharp as broken glass. Amara tried to step around the group, but Rachel shifted, blocking her path with deliberate precision. "I'm sorry, are you lost?" Rachel's voice dripped with false concern. "The guidance office is that way if you need help finding where you belong." A few students in Rachel's orbit snickered. Connor Matthews, the star quarterback with his Letterman jacket slung casually over his shoulder, leaned against the lockers with an amused smirk. His dark hair was styled in that effortless messy look that probably took 30 minutes to achieve, and his green eyes held a cruel gleam. "Maybe she's looking for the buses," Connor added, his voice carrying that particular brand of cruelty that jocks seemed to perfect. "I heard they run shuttles to the other side of town." More laughter rippled through their group. Amara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned long ago that reactions only fed bullies, giving them the satisfaction they craved. "Excuse me," Amara said quietly, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. She tried to step around them again. This time, Rachel's friend Madison, a petite redhead with sharp features, accidentally bumped into Amara's shoulder, causing her to stumble slightly. Papers from her folder scattered across the floor. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry!" Madison gasped dramatically, her hand flying to her mouth in mock horror. "I didn't see you there." The group erupted in barely contained giggles as Amara knelt to gather her papers. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, students slowing their pace to watch the spectacle unfold. Some pulled out their phones, and she heard the telltale sound of cameras clicking. "Nice bag," Rachel commented, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Very vintage. Did you get it at a garage sale?" "Actually, I think I saw one just like it at the Salvation Army," Connor added, earning another round of laughter from his audience. Amara stood slowly, her papers clutched tightly in her hands. She looked directly at Rachel, her dark eyes unwavering. "It was actually my grandmother's. She gave it to me before she passed away." The hallway fell silent for a moment. Something flickered across Rachel's face. Was it shame? But it was gone so quickly Amara wondered if she'd imagined it. "How touching," Rachel said finally, her voice regaining its mocking edge. "Well, I hope you and your grandmother's bag have a wonderful day at our school." The emphasis on "our" wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. As the group finally dispersed, Amara heard Rachel whisper something to Madison that made them both laugh. She caught fragments. "Thinks she can just," and "doesn't belong here." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of sideways glances and whispered conversations that died the moment she approached. In her second period chemistry class, The seat next to her remained conspicuously empty despite the room being nearly full. When she asked to borrow a pencil from the girl in front of her, she was met with a cold shoulder and silence. Lunch was the worst. Amara stood at the entrance to the cafeteria, surveying the social landscape before her. Every table seemed to have its designated tribe: the athletes, the theater kids, the honor students, the artists. But as she approached different groups with her tray, conversations would suddenly stop, and somehow there was never quite enough room for one more person. She finally found an empty table in the corner and sat alone, picking at her sandwich while trying to look busy with her phone. That's when she noticed Rachel's table, the prime real estate in the center of the cafeteria, and how every few minutes, someone would glance in her direction and whisper something that would send ripples of laughter through the group. Connor was holding court, regaling his teammates with some story that involved wild gestures and animated expressions. But Amara caught him looking at her several times, and each time his expression would shift to that same cruel amusement she'd witnessed in the hallway. As she stood to throw away her barely touched lunch, Rachel's voice carried across the cafeteria. "Some people just don't know when they're not wanted." The comment wasn't directed at anyone in particular, but Amara felt every eye in the cafeteria turn toward her. Her face burned with humiliation, but she kept walking, her head held high and her steps measured and calm. The afternoon brought no relief. In her AP history class, she was assigned to work on a group project, but when she approached her assigned teammates, they had already rearranged themselves to exclude her, claiming they were full, despite being one person short of the required 4. Walking to her locker after final period, Amara found a note taped to the metal door. In purple glitter pen, someone had written, "Go back where you came from." Her hands shook slightly as she crumpled the paper and shoved it deep into her bag. But what she didn't know, what none of the students crowding the hallways knew, was that a pair of sharp gray eyes had been watching everything unfold from the administrative wing of the building. Ms. Marion Hardwick, Ridgewood High's principal, stood behind her office window, her jaw clenched and her hands clasped tightly behind her back. Ms. Hardwick had built her reputation on running a tight ship. Students feared her stern demeanor and no-nonsense approach to discipline. What they didn't know was that she'd been receiving an increasing number of complaints about bullying from concerned parents and teachers. Anonymous reports had been flooding her desk for weeks, painting a picture of a toxic social environment that she was determined to address. But this, watching a student be systematically isolated and humiliated on her first day, this was different. This was personal in ways that none of those students could possibly understand. As Amara walked past the administrative offices toward the parking lot, she didn't look up at the window where Ms. Hardwick stood watching. If she had, she might have noticed something familiar in the older woman's expression, the same quiet strength that ran in their family, the same determination that had carried generations of strong women through much harder times than high school bullying. Instead, Amara climbed into her mother's Honda Civic, closed the door, and finally allowed herself to exhale. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her resolve. But tonight she would go home, help with dinner, do her homework, and pretend that everything was fine. After all, she had promised Aunt Marion that she could handle whatever Ridgewood High threw at her. And Amara Williams never broke her promises, even when keeping them felt like slowly drowning in a sea of whispered cruelty and manufactured indifference. As she drove away from the school, neither Amara nor any of her new classmates could have predicted how dramatically their world was about to change. The quiet storm brewing behind Ms. Hardwick's gray eyes was about to reshape everything they thought they knew about power, consequences, and the price of cruelty. But that reckoning was still a day away. For now, Amara drove home through the tree-lined streets of Ridgewood, planning how she would survive tomorrow without revealing the secret that connected her to the most feared authority figure in the school. The Williams family dinner table was set with care that evening, Mom's good china, fresh flowers from the garden, and the smell of pot roast filling the warm kitchen. But it wasn't just any dinner. Aunt Marion was coming over, as she did every Tuesday when her schedule allowed. Amara sat quietly, moving food around her plate, while her mother, Dr. Sarah Williams, chatted about her new position at the medical center. The conversation felt distant, like background noise, as images from her first day at Ridgewood played on repeat in her mind. "How was school today, sweetheart?" her mother asked, pausing mid-sentence about hospital drama. "Fine," Amara replied automatically, forcing a smile. "Just getting used to everything." The doorbell rang, and Amara's heart did a small flip. Through the kitchen window, she could see the familiar silver sedan in the driveway, the same car she'd seen in the principal's parking spot that morning. "That'll be Marian," her mother said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Amara, would you get the door?" Amara opened the front door to find Ms. Hardwick, but not the stern, intimidating principal from school. This was Aunt Marian, her father's best friend from college, the woman who had held Amara as a baby and taught her to ride a bike. Her gray hair was loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual severe bun, and she wore a soft cardigan instead of her sharp business suits. "There's my brilliant goddaughter," Marian said, pulling Amara into a warm hug. The embrace lingered a moment longer than usual, and Amara wondered if her aunt could sense the weight she was carrying. They had made an agreement 2 weeks ago, when Amara learned she'd be attending Ridgewood High. Marian wanted to see the school as it truly was, to observe the social dynamics without the filter of her authority affecting student behavior. Amara had insisted she could handle whatever came her way, that she didn't want special treatment or protection. "I want to earn my place there," she had told Marian then. "Just like you earned yours." Now, sitting at the dinner table while Marian and her mother discussed local news, Amara questioned that decision. Every laugh from Rachel's table echoed in her memory. Every cruel comment felt fresh and sharp. "Amara's been quiet tonight," Marian observed, her gray eyes studying her goddaughter's face. "Everything all right?" "Just tired," Amara deflected. "You know how first days can be." Marian nodded, but her expression remained concerned. She had built her career on reading people, on seeing through facades and getting to the truth beneath surface smiles. But she also respected the agreement they'd made, even when every instinct told her something was wrong. The next morning brought fresh torment. Amara arrived early, hoping to avoid the hallway gauntlet, but Rachel and her crew were already stationed by the main entrance like guard dogs protecting their territory. "Look who's back," Madison announced loudly. "I was hoping yesterday was just a bad dream." This time, they were bolder. Connor, accidentally, knocked Amara's books from her arms as she passed, sending them clattering across the floor. When she bent to pick them up, Rachel stepped on one of her notebooks, leaving a muddy footprint across her carefully organized notes. "Oops," Rachel said with mock innocence. "Guess you'll have to rewrite that." But it was during lunch that things escalated beyond simple harassment. Amara sat at the same corner table, trying to focus on her homework when she heard the familiar sound of phone cameras clicking. She looked up to see Madison holding up her phone, clearly recording. "Say something for TikTok," Madison commanded. "Tell everyone how much you love our school." Amara turned away, but Connor appeared at her other side, also filming. "Come on, don't be shy. We're just trying to make you famous." "Stop," Amara said quietly, her hands shaking as she gathered her things. "What was that?" Rachel asked, cupping her ear dramatically. "I didn't hear you. Did you guys hear anything?" The small crowd that had gathered laughed and shook their heads in exaggerated confusion. More phones appeared, creating a semicircle of recording devices around Amara's table. "Maybe she doesn't speak English," Connor suggested, earning another wave of laughter. That afternoon, Amara discovered a new rumor spreading through the school like wildfire. Someone had started whispering that she'd been caught stealing from the girls' locker room during PE. By the time she reached her final period, even teachers were looking at her strangely. The lie was so absurd it should have been easy to dismiss, but in the toxic ecosystem Rachel had created, truth mattered less than entertainment value. The story grew with each telling. First it was lip gloss, then jewelry, then money from someone's purse. Walking to her car after school, Amara found a group of freshman boys following her, recording on their phones and laughing. "There she is," one of them said loudly. "The thief girl." But what Amara didn't notice was a different observer in the crowd, a quiet freshman named Jalen Rodriguez who sat 2 seats behind her in AP Literature. While everyone else seemed caught up in the cruel spectacle, Jalen's dark eyes held something different: recognition and sympathy. That evening, Amara sat in her bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually bright smile was nowhere to be found. Her phone buzzed with notification after notification. Someone had found her social media accounts and was flooding her comments with cruel messages and laughing emojis. Downstairs, she could hear her mother on the phone with Aunt Marion, their voices low and serious. They were talking about her, she realized. Her mother had noticed her silence, her lack of appetite, the way she'd started flinching when her phone buzzed. "She says everything's fine," her mother was saying. "But I know my daughter. Something's wrong." Marion's response was too quiet to hear, but Amara could imagine the conflict on her godmother's face, torn between her professional role and her desire to protect the girl she loved like her own daughter. Later that night, as Amara finally fell into an exhausted sleep, she didn't know that Jalen Rodriguez was 3 blocks away, carefully reviewing the videos he'd secretly recorded throughout the day. Unlike Rachel's crew, who filmed for cruelty and entertainment, Jalen had been documenting something else entirely: evidence of systematic harassment that would soon change everything. The storm was gathering, and by tomorrow, the careful balance between Amara's silence and Marion's restraint would finally shatter. The anonymous message arrived on Amara's phone at 11:47 p.m. on Thursday night, 3 days after the locker room rumor had spread through Ridgewood High like poison. "You didn't deserve this." Below the message was a link to a private cloud folder. Amara's heart hammered as she clicked it, her bedroom lit only by the glow of her phone's screen. What she found made her breath catch in her throat. Video after video, all shot from careful angles that captured faces and voices clearly. Connor knocking her books down while laughing with his friends. Rachel stepping on her notebook with deliberate cruelty. Madison and the others surrounding her table during lunch, their phones thrust in her face like weapons. Even the freshman boys following her to the parking lot, their taunts crystal clear in the audio. Someone had been watching. Someone had been recording everything. Each video was timestamped and labeled with clinical precision. Hallway harassment Day 2, Cafeteria intimidation Day 3, False rumor propagation Day 4. Whoever had sent this wasn't just a casual observer. They had been methodically documenting a pattern of systematic bullying. Amara saved every single file to her phone, her hands trembling as she realized what she was holding. This was proof. Real, undeniable evidence of everything she'd endured in silence. The next morning brought a new low. Amara arrived at school to find her locker vandalized with permanent marker. Someone had written "thief" in large block letters across the metal door, along with other words she couldn't bring herself to read completely. "Wow, looks like someone's getting the recognition they deserve." Rachel's voice drifted from behind her, sugary sweet and poison-laced. Amara turned to see the entire pack gathered like vultures: Rachel, Connor, Madison, and at least 6 others, all wearing matching expressions of smug satisfaction. Several of them had their phones out, ready to capture her reaction for their social media entertainment. "Did you do this?" Amara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Do what?" Rachel's eyes widened in fake innocence. "I would never vandalize school property. That would be against the rules." Her followers tittered at the obvious lie. Connor stepped forward, his tall frame casting a shadow over Amara. "Maybe whoever did it was just trying to help other students stay safe. You know, public service announcement." The comment hit like a physical blow. Amara felt something crack inside her chest, not break entirely, but develop a hairline fracture that threatened to split wide open. "I didn't steal anything," she said quietly. "That's exactly what a thief would say." Madison chimed in, earning approving nods from the group. But it was Rachel's next move that finally shattered Amara's composure. The cheerleader pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind used in journalism class, and held it up like a microphone. "This is Rachel Morrison reporting live from Ridgewood High," she announced in a mock news anchor voice. I'm here with our newest student, who some people are calling the Ridgewood Thief. Any comment on the allegations?" The group erupted in laughter, and more phones appeared. Students in the hallway stopped to watch the spectacle, some recording their own versions for social media. Amara felt the walls closing in, felt the weight of dozens of eyes judging her, condemning her based on lies. For 3 days she had endured in silence. For 3 days she had kept her promise to Aunt Marian, had tried to handle this herself. But standing there in that hallway, surrounded by cruel laughter and flashing cameras, something inside her finally broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot, angry tears that she'd been holding back for days. The crowd fell silent for a moment, shocked by this crack in her composed facade. Then the recording intensified, everyone eager to capture her moment of vulnerability. "There it is," Connor whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Finally showing her true colors." Amara ran. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the laughter that followed her down the hallway, and burst into the nearest bathroom. Locking herself in a stall, she sobbed into her hands, all the pain and humiliation of the past week pouring out at once. But even in her breakdown, she didn't call Aunt Marian. Even shattered and alone, she couldn't bring herself to break their agreement. That evening was their regular Tuesday dinner. Amara sat across from Marian at the familiar kitchen table, but everything felt different now. The weight of the videos on her phone felt like carrying stones in her pocket. Marian seemed to sense the shift. Her usually sharp demeanor was softer tonight, her gray eyes gentle with concern. "You look tired, sweetheart." "Really tired?" "I'm okay," Amara whispered, but the words felt hollow. They made small talk through dinner, Marian's stories about difficult school board meetings, Mom's updates from the hospital. But underneath the normal conversation, tension hummed like a live wire. After her mother went to bed, Amara and Marian sat in the living room, the silence stretching between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross first. Finally, Marian spoke. "You know, in my 23 years as an educator, I've learned to recognize when a student is carrying more than they should." Amara's throat tightened. She pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. "I want to show you something," she said quietly. "But first I need you to promise me something." Marian leaned forward, her full attention focused on her goddaughter. "Promise me that whatever you see, you won't let it change how people see me at school. I don't want to be the principal's pet or the girl who couldn't handle her own problems." Marian's jaw clenched, a flash of the steel that made her legendary at Ridgewood. "Amara, if someone is hurting you, promise me." Amara interrupted, holding out her phone. Marian stared at the device for a long moment, then looked into Amara's eyes, eyes that held too much pain for a 17-year-old girl. "I promise I'll handle this the right way," Marian said carefully. "But I won't promise to let injustice continue." With shaking hands, Amara handed over her phone and watched as Marian's expression grew darker with each video. The older woman's knuckles went white as she gripped the device, her breathing becoming more controlled and dangerous with every cruel laugh and recorded taunt. When the last video ended, Marian set the phone down with deliberate precision. She looked at Amara with eyes that burned like steel forged in fire. "Come to school tomorrow like nothing happened," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had made her legendary. "I'll handle the rest." Neither of them spoke about what handling it would look like. But something had shifted in the air between them, and Amara knew that tomorrow would be different. The storm was about to break. The first sign that something had changed at Ridgewood High was the emergency assembly notice that appeared on every student's phone at 6:30 a.m. Mandatory assembly. All students report to auditorium by 8:15 a.m. No exceptions. Administration. Rachel Morrison stared at her phone screen, a frown creasing her perfectly made-up face. In her 4 years at Ridgewood, there had never been an emergency assembly. Principal Hardwick was notorious for handling problems quietly, behind closed doors, without disrupting the school's pristine image. "What do you think it's about?" Madison asked, sliding into the passenger seat of Rachel's BMW as they pulled into the school parking lot. Probably some boring announcement about standardized tests. Rachel replied, but something in her stomach twisted uneasily. She noticed Ms. Hardwick's car in the parking lot when she drove past the school at 6 a.m. on her way to Starbucks, unusually early, even for the famously workaholic principal. Connor met them at the main entrance, his usual cocky swagger slightly subdued. "My dad heard something about the school board calling an emergency meeting last night," he said, lowering his voice. "Apparently there's been some kind of complaint." The three exchanged glances, but none of them could imagine what kind of complaint would warrant this level of drama. After all, they were the popular kids, the ones teachers loved, the faces of Ridgewood High's success story. Inside the auditorium, the atmosphere was electric with nervous energy. Students filled the seats in their usual cliques, whispering theories and checking their phones. Rachel and her crew claimed their traditional spots in the fourth row, close enough to be seen, far enough back to make quiet comments. That's when Rachel noticed Amara Williams sitting alone in the back corner, her face unreadable, her hands folded calmly in her lap. For some reason, the sight of her made Rachel's unease spike into something closer to genuine anxiety. At exactly 8:15 a.m., the auditorium lights dimmed. Ms. Hardwick walked onto the stage, but this wasn't the principal they all knew. Gone was her usual composed demeanor, replaced by something that made the air itself feel dangerous. She moved with the controlled precision of a predator, her gray eyes scanning the crowd with laser focus. "Good morning," she began, her voice cutting through the whispers like a blade. The auditorium fell silent instantly. "I'm sure you're all wondering why we're here today." She clicked a remote, and the large screen behind her flickered to life. "Recently, it has come to my attention that some students at this school have been engaging in behavior that violates not only our code of conduct, but basic human decency." Rachel felt Connor shift nervously beside her. Madison's hand found her arm, gripping tightly. "Rather than simply tell you about this behavior," Ms. Hardwick continued, her voice growing colder, "I think it's important that you see it for yourselves." The first video began to play. The image was slightly shaky, clearly shot from a hidden angle, but the audio was crystal clear. Rachel's own voice filled the auditorium. Well, what do we have here?" A collective gasp rose from the student body as they watched Rachel and her friends surround Amara on her first day. Every cruel comment, every mocking laugh, every deliberate bump and shove was captured in high definition. The faces weren't blurred. The voices weren't disguised. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face as she watched herself step on Amara's notebook, her expression twisted with petty cruelty. Around her, she could feel hundreds of eyes turning in her direction, students craning their necks to get a look at the girl on screen. But Ms. Hardwick wasn't finished. Video after video played, each one more damning than the last. Connor knocking books from Amara's hands while his teammates laughed. Madison leading the cafeteria recording session, her voice shrill with excitement as she tormented a girl who had done nothing wrong. The locker vandalization, captured by a security camera Rachel didn't even know existed. The auditorium was dead silent except for the sound of Rachel's recorded voice saying, "Maybe she's looking for the buses. I heard they run shuttles to the other side of town." Several students in the audience shifted uncomfortably. A few turned to look at Rachel with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never be seen again. When the final video ended, Rachel's cruel mock interview from the day before, Ms. Hardwick let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "What you have just witnessed," she said finally, "is systematic harassment, bullying, emotional abuse directed at a student whose only crime was being new to our school." Her eyes found Rachel in the crowd, and the look in them made Rachel's chest tighten with panic. The students responsible for this behavior know who they are. What they may not know is that every single incident was documented. Every cruel comment was recorded. Every moment of torment was captured. Ms. Hardwick began reading names from a list, her voice echoing through the stunned auditorium. Rachel Morrison, Connor Matthews, Madison Pierce, Tyler Webb, Jessica Chin, David Rodriguez, Each name hit the room like a physical blow. Rachel heard her own name and felt her world tilt sideways. Around her, her friends were staring at their hands, their faces pale with shock and growing horror. These students are suspended immediately, pending a formal investigation by the school board and a student disciplinary tribunal. They will not be permitted on school grounds or at any school-sponsored events until this matter is resolved. The auditorium erupted in whispers and gasps. Rachel felt tears burning her eyes, not tears of remorse, but tears of humiliation and rage. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. She was Rachel Morrison. She was untouchable. Furthermore, Ms. Hardwick continued, raising her voice above the chaos. I am announcing the immediate implementation of a comprehensive anti-bullying initiative, developed in partnership with the Marcus Foundation for Student Rights. We will have zero tolerance for harassment of any kind. As security guards appeared at the auditorium doors, clearly there to escort the suspended students out, Ms. Hardwick's eyes found Amara in the back of the room. I want every student in this school to understand something, she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Cruelty will not be tolerated. Harassment will not be ignored. And anyone who thinks they can torment another human being without consequences will learn otherwise. Rachel stood on shaking legs as the security guard approached their row. Around her, the auditorium buzzed with shocked conversation. Students were pulling out their phones, already posting about the dramatic turn of events. As she was escorted from the auditorium, Rachel caught one final glimpse of Amara Williams. The girl who had been their victim was sitting quietly in her corner seat, watching the proceedings with calm dignity. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Rachel Morrison truly understood the difference between power and strength. By noon, Rachel Morrison's world had completely collapsed. The videos from the assembly had gone viral within hours. Students who had been too afraid to speak up before were now sharing the footage across every social media platform, adding their own commentary about Rachel's reign of terror. Her Instagram followers, once a source of pride at 12,000 strong, were dropping by the hundreds. The comments section had become a wasteland of anger and disgust. Finally, someone exposed this mean girl. She got what she deserved. How could anyone be so cruel? But the social media backlash was nothing compared to what happened when her parents got the call from Principal Hardwick. Rachel sat in the principal's office, her mother's manicured nails digging into the leather chair as Mrs. Morrison's voice rose to near hysteria. This is absolutely unacceptable. Rachel made some mistakes, yes, but to humiliate her publicly like this. Mrs. Morrison, Ms. Hardwick interrupted, her voice cutting through the tirade with surgical precision. Your daughter systematically harassed another student for an entire week. She encouraged others to join in. She created and spread false rumors designed to destroy a young woman's reputation. She clicked her laptop, and the videos began playing again on the office screen. Mrs. Morrison fell silent as she watched her daughter's cruelty displayed in crystal-clear detail. Oh my God! Mr. Morrison whispered, his face going pale. Rachel, is this really you? Rachel couldn't meet her father's eyes. The girl on screen looked like a monster, cruel, calculating, enjoying every moment of another person's pain. She wanted to explain that it wasn't really her, that she'd just gotten carried away, but the evidence was undeniable. The school board has voted unanimously to uphold the suspension, Ms. Hardwick continued. Rachel will face a disciplinary tribunal next week. Depending on their findings, she may face permanent expulsion. The word expulsion hit the room like a bomb. Mrs. Morrison began crying, mascara streaming down her cheeks. Rachel's college applications, already submitted to Duke, Stanford, and UNC, would be flagged. Her early admission letter to Duke would likely be revoked. There has to be something we can do, Mrs. Morrison pleaded. Rachel's future is at stake. Ms. Hardwick's gray eyes were granite hard. Your daughter chose to stake her future on cruelty. These are the consequences of that choice. Meanwhile, Connor Matthews was facing his own reckoning. The football coach had called an emergency team meeting, and the locker room was thick with tension. You're off the team, Coach Williams announced without preamble. Effective immediately. Connor's teammates avoided his eyes. Some of them had been there during the hallway incidents, had laughed along with his jokes. Now they acted like he was radioactive. "Coach, please," Connor started, but the older man held up a hand. "The university scouts who were coming to watch you play next week? They've cancelled. Word travels fast in college athletics, son. No one wants to recruit a bully. The full-ride scholarship to state, gone." His dreams of playing college football shattered. Connor's phone buzzed constantly with messages from former friends distancing themselves, sponsors pulling endorsements from his social media accounts. But it was the conversation with his little sister that broke him completely. "Is it true?" Emma asked, appearing in his doorway that evening. At 13, she looked up to Connor like he was a superhero. "Did you really hurt that girl?" Connor tried to explain, to make excuses, but Emma just shook her head and walked away. Later, he heard her on the phone with her friends. "Yeah, my brother's the one from the videos. I'm so embarrassed." By Thursday, 3 days after the assembly, Rachel knew she had to do something. Her social media accounts were destroyed, her reputation in ruins, and whispers followed her everywhere she went in town. But it was the discovery of Amara's connection to Ms. Hardwick that gave her what she thought was leverage. She found Amara in the school library. Suspended students weren't allowed on campus, but Rachel had snuck in through a side entrance. Amara was reading quietly at a corner table, looking peaceful in a way that made Rachel's blood boil. "I know who you are," Rachel hissed, sliding into the chair across from her. "You're her goddaughter, aren't you? The principal's little pet." Amara looked up calmly, closing her book with deliberate precision. "Yes, I am." The simple admission caught Rachel off guard. She'd expected denial, embarrassment, anything but this quiet confidence. "So this was all planned," Rachel continued, her voice growing desperate. "You came here to set us up, to destroy us." "I came here to go to school," Amara replied evenly. "You chose to make it about something else." Rachel felt tears of frustration building. "Do you have any idea what you've done to my life? My college acceptance, my scholarships, my reputation. Do you have any idea what you did to mine?" Amara's voice remained calm, but something steel-hard entered her dark eyes. "You tried to make me feel worthless. You spread lies about me. You turned an entire school against me on my first day." "I'm sorry," Rachel said, but the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "I'm really, really sorry. Can't you talk to your godmother? Can't you fix this?" Amara studied Rachel's face for a long moment, seeing the desperation and panic there. When she spoke, her words cut deeper than any insult Rachel had ever delivered. "You're not sorry I got hurt," Amara said quietly. "You're sorry it hurt you." The truth of those words hit Rachel like a physical blow. She sat there, staring at this girl she tried to destroy, and realized that Amara was everything Rachel had pretended to be: strong, dignified, unbreakable. "Please," Rachel whispered, her voice cracking. "I'll do anything. I'll make it right." But Amara was already standing, gathering her books with the same calm grace she'd maintained through every cruel encounter. "You had your chance to make it right," she said. "Every day for a week, you had the chance to choose kindness instead of cruelty. You chose differently." As Amara walked away, Rachel sat alone in the library, finally understanding the weight of her actions. The girls she tried to break had proven unbreakable, while Rachel's own world had crumbled at the first real test. Outside, Connor was in his car, leaving voicemails for Amara that would go unanswered. "Please, I know I messed up. I know you probably hate me, but I need help. I need someone to tell them I'm not really like this." But the damage was done. Their desperate pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears, because mercy was something they had never chosen to show when they held the power. The reckoning was complete, and there was no going back. 3 weeks after the assembly that changed everything, Amara Williams walked through the halls of Ridgewood High with her head held high, not because of her godmother's power, but because she had earned her place through strength and dignity. The transformation was remarkable. Where once students had avoided her table in the cafeteria, Now she found herself surrounded by new faces every day. Sarah Chin, president of the debate team, had invited her to join their upcoming tournament. Marcus Thompson, editor of the school newspaper, had asked her to write a column about her experience. Even some of the athletes who had once laughed at Connor's jokes now nodded respectfully when she passed in the halls. But it was the quiet freshman who approached her one Tuesday morning that meant the most. "Amara?" Jalen Rodriguez stood nervously by her locker, his dark eyes sincere behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I need to tell you something." She turned to face him fully, recognizing something familiar in his expression, the same careful observation she noticed in him during AP Literature. "I was the one who sent you those videos," he said quietly. "I recorded everything because someone needed to see what was really happening." Amara felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You saved me," she whispered. "Why?" Jalen shifted his backpack, looking down at his shoes. "My older brother went through something similar at his school 2 years ago. Nobody helped him. Nobody stood up for him. He ended up having to transfer." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I couldn't let that happen to someone else when I had the power to do something about it." It was then that Amara realized the true meaning of allyship, not the performative kind that came after someone gained popularity, but the quiet, brave kind that acted when it mattered most, when no one was watching. "Would you like to help me with something?" she asked, an idea forming. Within a week, Amara and Jalen had presented their proposal to Ms. Hardwick, a student-led committee focused on respect and inclusion. Not just anti-bullying workshops that students would zone out during, but real change, peer mediation programs, anonymous reporting systems, and most importantly, student ambassadors who would help new kids navigate the social landscape of Ridgewood High. The Bridges Committee, Amara explained to the packed classroom where their first meeting was being held. "Because that's what we want to build, bridges between different groups, bridges for students who feel isolated, bridges toward a better school culture." The response was overwhelming. Students from every social group had shown up: theater kids, athletes, honor students, even some of the former popular crowd who were trying to rebuild their reputations through genuine change. Emma Matthews, Connor's younger sister, raised her hand tentatively. "I want to help," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "What my brother did was wrong, and I want to make sure it never happens to anyone else." Amara saw the courage it took for Emma to speak up, knowing her last name now carried shame in these halls. "We'd love to have you," she said simply, and the relief in Emma's eyes was unmistakable. The committee's first major initiative was a new student welcome program. Every transfer student would be paired with an ambassador who would help them navigate not just the academic side of Ridgewood, but the social dynamics as well. No one would have to sit alone at lunch on their first day. No one would have to figure out the unspoken rules by themselves. Ms. Hardwick watched the transformation with quiet pride. The school board had not only upheld the suspensions but had used Ridgewood as a model for implementing district-wide anti-bullying policies. 3 other schools had already reached out asking for copies of their new protocols. But it was the conversation she had with Amara one evening over dinner that meant the most. "I'm proud of you," Marian said, setting down her coffee cup. "Not just for surviving what you went through, but for turning it into something positive." Amara smiled, thinking of the meeting they'd had that afternoon where a shy sophomore had thanked her for making the school feel safe. "You know what's funny? I used to think strength meant handling everything alone. Now I realize it means knowing when to ask for help and when to offer it." As for Rachel and Connor, their futures had taken dramatically different paths. Rachel's disciplinary tribunal had resulted in a semester-long suspension and mandatory community service. Her college admissions had been rescinded, but she was slowly beginning to understand the impact of her actions. She'd started volunteering at a local youth center, working with kids who had been bullied, trying to make amends in the only way she knew how. Connor's story was more complicated. Without football, he'd struggled to find his identity. But Emma's involvement in the Bridges Committee had opened his eyes to how his actions had affected not just Amara, but his entire family. He'd written a letter of apology, not asking for forgiveness, but taking full responsibility for his choices. Amara had never responded, but she'd kept the letter, recognizing the genuine remorse in his words. The most telling moment came during lunch on a Friday in November. Amara sat at her usual table, now surrounded by a diverse group of friends, Jalen on her left, Sarah Chin across from her, Emma Matthews beside her, and several others who had found their place in the new Ridgewood culture. A new student, a nervous-looking boy with thick glasses and a stutter, stood at the edge of the cafeteria looking lost. Without hesitation, 3 different students from 3 different tables stood up to invite him to sit with them. Amara watched with satisfaction as the boy's face lit up with relief and gratitude. This was what change looked like, not grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but small moments of kindness multiplied across an entire community. Walking home that day, Amara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd come to Ridgewood High as the new girl, scared and alone. She was leaving her mark as a leader, a bridge builder, someone who had turned her pain into purpose. She'd learned that true strength wasn't about being invulnerable. It was about being brave enough to be vulnerable, to ask for help when you needed it, and to stand up for others when they needed you. The halls of Ridgewood High would never be perfect. There would always be challenges, always be students who struggled to fit in. But now there was something different in the air, a culture where cruelty was not tolerated, where kindness was not seen as weakness, and where everyone had a place to belong. Amara Williams had not just survived her ordeal. She had transformed it into something beautiful, something lasting, something that would protect countless other students for years to come. And that, she realized, was the most powerful revenge of all.